morning, and what a great day to be in church. Welcome to Creekside Online. My name is Paul Williams, and welcome to my kitchen table again. I know that I say this every week, but it is really great that you take time each week to join us. We're so thankful you can do this. You know, for the next 15 minutes or so, as best as you can, our hope and prayer is that you would put away distractions and lean into this moment. We believe that God can meet you right where you are. Because of His tremendous love for us, distance doesn't matter. Hey, if you're new to Creekside Online, thank you for coming. I don't know how you found us today, but I'm super glad that you're here. We'd love to connect with you and say thanks and perhaps answer questions that you may have. And the best way to do this is to click the New Here button that's just above me. A simple form will open up and you fill that out, and one of our online team will connect with you this week. Or if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, a link will appear in the chat. It opens up that same form, and again, we'd love to connect with you. Speaking of Facebook and YouTube, we'd so appreciate it if you would share, like, or subscribe this. It's a wonderful way to share some good news, and it's really super simple right now. You can do it right now. Thank you for doing that. We so appreciate it. So here we are at stage 3 of Ontario's reopening plan. We can go out to eat, and we can have a party of 50 people. I'm in. We can go out to playgrounds. It's great. And what a great opportunity for us. We're not gathering on Sundays like we did before, but why not take some time, gather some friends together, and watch the service together? You can have your own little church right there. Now, we know it's been tough to adjust in this COVID season, and some of us have made bigger adjustments than others, whether it's unemployment or distancing from family. And if you ever need some help and don't know who to talk to, we encourage you to take advantage of that Creekside Cares form that's found on our website. It's what we're here for. I love putting my girls to bed, and one of the many things we love to do is to read a story. And if you have kids, you kind of know there's phases that they go through where they have a favorite book. And last Christmas we had a favorite book. It was The Grinch, and we read it almost every night. In fact, we could still quote sections of the book, and I'm sure you have books in your head too. Thank you, Dr. Zeus. And today we're going to look at one such very popular Bible story with some very fresh eyes. In fact, that's what this whole series is all about. How Jesus tells stories that are very common but packed with a very powerful truth. And today we're going to look at the Good Samaritan. And I'm sure you've heard that story 1,000 times. But join with us today as we look at this story and see how Jesus told that story with a slant. Now don't forget to jump into the chat and let us know where you're watching from. And why not share your favorite book, or if you're not into books, your favorite TV show with someone else, and see who else you can meet in the chat. And also, if you need prayer for yourself or someone you know, there's a live prayer button just below me. Click on that, and one of our online team will be happy to pray with you right here online. All right, let's get started. Here we go.
Hey Creekside, my name is Caleb, and we're so excited that you made it out today. Man, I don't know about you, but I'm constantly overwhelmed by God's love for us, that He would send His Son to die while we were still sinners. Man, can we just praise Him for that love today? Come on, why don't you join us?
Between us, by the cross you came and broke them down. You broke them down. And there were chains around us. By your grace we are no longer bound. No longer bound. You call me out of the grave. You call me into the light. You call my name and then my heart came alive. Your love is greater. Your love is stronger. Your love awakens, awakens, awakens me. Your love is greater. Your love is stronger. Your love awakens, awakens, awakens me.
Come on, let's sing it out. Feel the darkness.
And feel the darkness shaking. All the dead are coming back to life. Roll back to life. Hear the sun awaken. All creation singing, we're alive. 'Cause you're alive. You call me out of the grave. You call me into the light. You call my name and then my heart came alive. Your love is greater. Your love is stronger. Your love awakens, awakens, awakens me. Your love is great. shout it out with life, 'cause you're alive. Your love is greater, your love is stronger, your love awakens, awakens, awakens me. Your love is greater, your love is stronger, your love awakens, awakens, awakens me. Your love is greater, your love is stronger, your love awakens, awakens, awakens me. Your love is greater, your love is stronger, your love awakens, awakens, awakens me. Oh, your love awakens me.
Hi Creekside, Jeff here. It's an exciting day here at Creekside. A beautiful day as we're outside by the pond. It's an exciting day because we're having baptisms here today. I'm here with Mark and Brianne. In a couple minutes, Mark is going to be baptized. But before he is baptized, we're going to watch Mark's life story on video. So check this out.
Hi, my name is Mark Bullard. I've been coming to Creekside Church for about a year now. I grew up in the Catholic school system. I was baptized, but I never really truly formed a relationship with Jesus throughout those years. Later on, my family had some tough health issues with members in my family, and those were tough, trying times. And looking back on those times, I wish I had that relationship with Jesus to lean on and have someone to be there for me and be my rock. And looking back on those times, knowing what I know now, I know that Jesus would be there for me in those times, and that's truly what brought me here today. Knowing that Jesus will be my life leader and my sin forgiver, knowing that He died for us to take away our sins, and that is truly what's led me to be baptized here today. It's my public profession of my obedience to God, to live in that Christ-like way. Jesus has brought this overarching sense of happiness to my life that I didn't have in the past, knowing that He died for us and knowing that there is someone out there that died for us to take away our sins just brings us happiness that I've never had before. And that's something that you can't replicate any other way other than to follow Jesus and to love Jesus. Hi, my name is Mark, and I'm a follower of Jesus Christ.
Hi, I'm Brianne, and Mark has chosen this promise verse. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. For the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. Joshua 1:9.
Church, let's look at Psalms 34:9. It says, "Worship in awe and wonder all you who've been made holy. For all who fear Him will feast with plenty." We're about to sing a song that talks about God being abundantly more than we can ask, think, or imagine. But upon reading Psalms 34:9, specifically the part where it says, "For all who fear Him will feast with plenty," I realized that both God and us as believers play a part in it. God takes care of being abundantly more, but our job to unlock it in our lives is to surrender our hearts, will, minds, and emotions out of reverence for Him. I don't know what it is we're struggling with to surrender to God, but as we continue to worship, let's enter God's presence and give Him complete access to our entire lives. Let's keep worshiping.
God, your love for me is better than I imagined. More than I could ask or see, more than I could fathom. God, your love for me is better than I imagined. More than I could ask or see, more than I could fathom. God, your love for me is better than I imagined.
Jesus, we sang these truths that in you we have victory. God, that you are abundantly more than everything that we are facing today in this world. God, that though the world may be a dark and scary place, God, you have overcome it all. And we can stand triumphantly in the victory that we receive through you. God, we thank you that you love us, that you came and gave your son for us. God, you are a good God, and we're thankful that you love each one of us enough to pursue us, to not give up on us, to never turn us away. Jesus, we love you. We thank you that you love us back. And it's in your son's precious name that we say, we love you, Daddy. Amen.
In Luke's gospel, he tells us that one day a teacher of the law stands up to challenge Jesus. This is what teachers of the law do. They challenge other teachers. And Jesus himself was a teacher who had begun to amass a large following of people. And so on this day, this teacher of the law stands up and he wants to figure out, is this Jesus guy someone that we should all be following? Is this Jesus guy someone that we can trust his teaching? And just where is his teaching coming from? And so he asks Jesus this amazing question. Jesus, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Now, when we hear that question, we may hear the word eternal and we think, oh, he's asking a question about, Jesus, what do I have to do in order to live a life that goes on forever? But when he asked this question, he probably meant a lot more than just how do I live on forever. He was referring not only to a quantity of life, but to a quality of life. A type of life that was a life lived with God, and because it was lived with God, it was the abundant life that we were all meant to experience. He's basically asking Jesus, how do I be fully alive? How do I experience all that there is for me to experience in this life? Isn't this an amazing question that he asked Jesus? This is the question that I want answered every day when I wake up. Like if I could just have Jesus at my bedside and when I wake up I say, Jesus, what do I have to do today to be fully alive? What do I have to do? What decisions do I have to make? What do I have to do with my money? How do I have to treat people? If Jesus could just kind of point me in the right direction on all those things, that would be so helpful. And so this man, this teacher of the law, he wants to find this out and he asks Jesus, what do I have to do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus asks him a question. Well, what does the law say? How do you interpret what the law says? And the man says, well, the law says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. To which Jesus says, that's a great answer. Pulled right from the Torah, that's a great answer. Do that and you will live. Do that and you will experience the abundant life that you're looking for. Do that and you will be fully alive. But the man's not done. He's not done because Jesus has just given him a very safe answer, an answer that many rabbis would have given. He wants to find out more about what Jesus is teaching. And so he has a follow-up question. It seems like this is the question that he wanted to ask from the beginning. And so he asked Jesus, but Jesus, just who is my neighbor? You say love God and love your neighbor as yourself. Who's my neighbor, Jesus? What's he asking in this question? Because they've already agreed we need to love God and love our neighbor. And so what this man is asking is, who do I have to love? What are the limits on love? Well, is there like a boundary marker? In effect, he's saying, Jesus, who isn't my neighbor? Who don't I have to love? And at this question, Jesus realizes that this man is digging deeper, and that the truth that Jesus needs to deliver to this man is far more complex and will rattle his soul and his entire worldview much more than the answer that he just pulled out of the Torah. The way that Jesus is going to answer this question isn't going to be with a straightforward black and white, this is who your neighbor is, go and love this person. The way that Jesus answers this question is how he answers many questions as we read through the accounts of the Gospels. It's with a story that we call a parable, which is a short story that is packed with truth. It's a way of getting at the truth in almost like a sneaky way, a way of like having the truth sneak up on this man. In his book, Eugene Peterson wrote a book called Tell It Slant. He references a poem by Emily Dickinson called Tell It Slant. And this poem is all about how certain truths need to be delivered slowly. They need to be delivered gradually. She has this great line that truth must dazzle us gradually, or else every man be blind. And what she's getting at is that there are certain truths in life that you can't just be handed, or else it'll blind you, or else you won't be able to see it. If someone just says, here's the truth to that, you will be like, I can't see it because my worldview, the way that I live my whole life, that truth confronts it, and I'm not able to see it or accept it. And so instead, when delivering certain types of truth that are really gonna shake people, you need to tell it slant. And this is what Jesus does when he tells his parables. This is Jesus telling it slant. This is Jesus dazzling us gradually. And why does he do this? Because he wants us to get it. Because Jesus doesn't want to blind us. He doesn't want to just hammer out truth and have everyone go, we don't know what you mean, Jesus. I guess we'll go follow someone else. He tells these stories so that they'll begin to work their way into us, and slowly our eyes will be open to see the truth. And so this teacher, who originally had stood up to test Jesus, now finds himself being told a story by the master teacher. And this is the parable that Jesus launches into. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense that you may have. So Jesus tells this parable, and then he asks the man, you tell me, which of the 3 men was a neighbor to the man that fell into the hands of the robbers? And the teacher of the law says, it was the one who showed mercy on the man in the ditch. To which Jesus says, go and do likewise. This is Jesus telling it slant. This is Jesus delivering truth gradually to this man. When we read this story 2,000 years later, maybe the first surface level analysis of this story, maybe the way that you remember this story because you heard this story when you were a kid, is basically, this is a lesson about if you ever see somebody on the side of the road that needs some help, if you're ever walking down the road and you see somebody with one of those jars and they're asking for money, this is a story where Jesus is saying, be the person that helps that person out. And while I wouldn't discourage you helping out someone that you see in need on the side of the road, I think what Jesus is doing in this story, and what Luke is doing as he's framed this parable with this narrative about Jesus being challenged by a teacher of the law, is trying to deliver so much more truth to us than just, here's what you do when you're in this scenario of walking on the path from Jerusalem to Jericho and you see someone on the side of the road. I think there's so much more packed into this story. And the way that we get at that truth is that we believe that what Jesus wants to do is to dazzle us gradually with the truth. And the way that we get that truth out of the story is by sitting with the story and ruminating on the story and participating in the story with our imaginations. So what I want to do for you and what I want to do throughout the rest of this series called Jesus Telling It Slant is to participate in these parables with our imaginations and allow Jesus to slowly bring more and more truth out of the story, slowly reveal more and more to us, slowly reveal to us more and more about who we are and how we're seeing the world and where we're off and where he wants to correct where we're off. So observation number 1, the man would have realized right away that Jesus tells a story in which his enemy is actually the hero of the story. The hero of this story is a Samaritan. And the Jewish people and the Samaritans were constantly at each other. They had different places of worship, they had different texts that they would use to worship, and they were always doing little things to mess with each other. There's a story about how the Samaritans snuck dead bones into the Jewish temple during Passover. And so during Passover, this temple's flooded with people, and people start to find dead bones everywhere, which makes the whole place unclean, and they had to shut down the entire temple. And in Luke chapter 9, which is the chapter right before we get this parable in Luke chapter 10, we're told a story where Jesus sends out all of his messengers ahead of him to cities and places before he would get there, so that they'd prepare the way. And it says that he sent some to Samaria, but the Samaritans rejected his messengers. And so his messengers come back to Jesus and they report, hey, the Samaritans, they don't want anything to do with us. So we got an idea. We should rain down fire from heaven upon them. This is what the Jewish people thought of the Samaritans. Any reason to rain down fire from heaven would be a great day for these people. And so this teacher of the law comes up to Jesus asking, remember, he's asking, well, how do I be fully alive? How do I fully experience life? And just who is my neighbor? If I have to love my neighbor, then who is it that's my neighbor? And Jesus tells a story where his enemy is actually the hero in the story. His enemy is the one who shows neighborly love to the Jewish man in the ditch. The other thing that Jesus does is he disrupts a really familiar story pattern that the man would have been listening for. So Jesus says, there's a man on the side of the road, there's a man in the ditch, he's dying. And who comes by? A priest. A priest is like the top of Jewish society. And the priest walks by. Then who comes next? A Levite walks by. Who's a Levite? The Levite is the helper of the priest in the temple. He comes down, he walks by. Now in normal storytelling, there would have been an anticipation of who was coming next. We had the top person in Jewish society, we had kind of like a middle person. Who should come next? Maybe just like a normal Jewish guy should come down the road next. You know who should come next? A teacher of the law should come next, Jesus. The guy listening to this story would have been anticipating, I know who's coming next in this story. Me! That's why Jesus is telling this story. He's telling a story where I'm going to be the hero and I'm going to find out that this is what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to help people that are on the side of the road in the ditch. That's who my neighbor is. When I see a Jewish person in the ditch, I should help them, and I'm going to go home justified. I'm going to go home justified because I'm going to be able to say, I've been doing that my whole life. I've been helping my fellow Jewish people my whole life. And so when Jesus says to this man, and then a Jewish person came by, and then a teacher of the law came by, instead when Jesus says, and then a Samaritan came by, it would have completely disrupted this man. Because when you're listening to a story that Jesus is telling, you're trying to locate yourself in the story. And so the man would have thought, well, I'm not the priest, and I'm not the Levite, and I was kind of hoping I was going to be the third character and maybe get to be the hero of the story, but now I'm not him either. And so I'm running out of options of who I am in this story. So Jesus, are you telling me I'm supposed to be the man in the ditch? To which I think Jesus would say, yeah. I'm telling this story to try to disrupt your entire worldview. Because you began to ask this question from a position of power, a position of status, a position of we have God on our side, we are the blessed people, we have love to give. And Jesus, who is it that we should be loving and who is it that we shouldn't be loving? And Jesus says, stop thinking of the world that way. Put yourself in the ditch and see how it begins to change the way that you see the world. Because from the ditch, you won't ask that question anymore. From the ditch, you won't ask the question of who's allowed to love me, who's allowed to help me. From the ditch, you'll be like, will somebody please just help me? Jesus is trying to paint for this guy a completely different way of seeing the world. One in which, imagine if everybody showed mercy and compassion to whoever was in need. Jesus doesn't want to give this guy a black and white answer. Here's who your neighbor is, go love them. He's trying to completely reframe the way that this teacher of the law sees the world, sees his role in the world, and ultimately sees who God is. Another observation that you'll have as you engage with this story is that you'll realize that Jesus changes the man's question. Or the way that I like to put it is that he fixes the man's question. The man started off with a question asking, Jesus, who is my neighbor? And at the end, Jesus rephrases the question and he asks the man, who was a neighbor? Jesus is trying to alter this guy's way of seeing the world. Because essentially this teacher of the law came at Jesus with two of the most selfish questions that you could ever ask. Think of it this way. He begins with, Jesus, what do I have to do to be fully alive? What do I have to do to get God on my side so that I'm fully alive? And Jesus tells him, and then he's like, okay, so now what is the bare minimum that I have to do to experience that kind of life? Do you see how selfish these questions are? Jesus, how do I be fully alive? Well, you got to love your neighbor as yourself. And he says, okay, so what's the bare minimum? Like, who do I have to love? And then I can like kind of cut off that list. I don't have to love those people so that I can experience that kind of life. And Jesus wants to once again correct this guy's whole way of thinking by instead having him ask, who was a neighbor? Which is a way of encouraging the guy to stop asking, what is the bare minimum? Who do I have to love? But instead to begin to ask, who can I be a neighbor to? For Jesus, I think what he's trying to teach through this parable is to change the way that this guy sees the world from a how do I get from God to how do I be like God? How do I participate in what God would have me do? And Jesus is saying, if you become a person of mercy, if you become a person who is trying to be a neighbor to everyone that you interact with, when you do that, you'll find that you are fully alive. So we spent some time imagining how Jesus wants us to imagine ourselves in the ditch. We spent some time imagining how Jesus wants us to think of ourselves as the Samaritan, looking in the world for how we can be a neighbor. But there's other characters in the story. There's the priest and the Levite. I think these are really significant characters that Jesus gives us. Priests and Levites worked in the temple. They would have been part of the sacrificial system. And so when they walked by this man on the side of the road, they had a decision to make. It wasn't just, should we help this man? Should we help this fellow Jewish person? Should we help this brother of ours? Their decision was, well, if we help him, then we can't also do our work at the temple. Because if we help him and we touch his blood and maybe he's dead and we're going to end up touching a dead body, if we do those things, we will become unclean and will no longer be able to perform our roles as priests and Levites in the temple. And so what they decide as they walk by is, I've got more important things to do. I've got more important things that God has called me to do. God has called me to be a priest and to offer sacrifices in the temple. And surely what God wants is sacrifice, not mercy. But what Jesus is teaching in this story is that it's actually the exact opposite. That what God desires more than sacrifices in the temple is mercy. This is something that we hear Jesus teach in the Gospels, and he pulls it right from Hosea chapter 6, verse 6. That God desires mercy, not sacrifice. Now there's one more character that we haven't thought about in this story, and that's the innkeeper. Remember, the Good Samaritan comes and he finds the man on the side of the road. He pours out some oil and wine and he bandages up the man, and he puts him on his donkey and he brings him to the inn, and he gives the innkeeper some money to take care of him. And then he says, if it costs any more, I'll come back later and I'll make up for whatever I owe you. Now, when you read this story, you might think, oh, it's just an easy way to kind of tie up loose ends in this story. But there's a really interesting thing that the church fathers did with this story, and it's called allegorizing. Allegorizing is where you see everything in the story as a symbol for something else. Now, sometimes this way of reading the Bible can go horribly wrong, and it certainly has gone horribly wrong, but other times it's really interesting, and it feels like this is the way, or at least one of the ways, in which the story was meant to be read. Think about the man on the side of the road as a representation for fallen humanity. Humanity lays bleeding, dying in a ditch, drowning in our own sin, helpless to help ourselves. And then who comes by? The law walks by. And the law is helpless to help us as well. And so the law goes by and it just kind of like condemns us further in our state. And then who comes by? Jesus comes by. God in the flesh comes by, who could be described as the enemy of fallen humanity. And yet God comes by and he has mercy and compassion on broken humanity. And he pours out this oil and this wine and he heals us, and then he brings us to this inn. And that the inn in this allegorization represents the church. And so the church is this group of people that have been found and healed by Jesus. And we are constantly welcoming more and more people in to this community of people. And so I love this interpretation of this story, because what it means is that Jesus hides himself in this parable. He hides himself in the parable in a way that the man and the group of people first listening to this story would never have been able to make sense of in that moment. It would have only been later on, as they understood who Jesus was and what he did, that they would have been able to think, I remember that one day when Jesus told us that parable. And as I'm ruminating on it now, I'm realizing, you know what? One way that I could look at this story is that Jesus is the Good Samaritan. So there's just a few examples to show you just how much is packed into these stories that Jesus tells. And I hope that you're able to begin to see how these stories are meant to dazzle us gradually. What it means to say that Jesus is telling it slant, telling truth to us on a slanted angle, in an angle that is hopefully able to get to us in ways that truth that was put right in our face wouldn't be able to get at us. And so what I want you to do is to begin to ruminate on this parable this week and go through the different characters. Imagine yourself as the different characters in the story. Put yourself in the scene and ask Jesus, what do you want to reveal to me from this place in the story? What is it in my life that is similar to this place in this story? So imagine yourself as the man in the ditch. Jesus, where do I need to recognize my need for you? Where do I need to recognize my own helplessness? Where am I the man in the ditch in this story? Imagine yourself as the priest or the Levite who walks by, who says, I've got more important things to do. I've got more important things to do than help this person. I've got more important things to do than to be a neighbor. And maybe from that position, you'll hear Jesus say to you, there is nothing more important that you have to do than to be a person who brings mercy and compassion into the world. And spend some time as the Samaritan. Spend some time as a person who is going around the world looking to be a neighbor. What does that look like? Where are the people that you are refusing to see? Where are the people that you just haven't been aware of, but suddenly Jesus is going to make you aware of where you can be a neighbor to people in your life? Maybe it'll be neighbors, maybe it'll be coworkers, maybe it'll be people in your own house that you need to show mercy to. And Jesus is going to reveal that to you as you begin to meditate on this story. And lastly, spend some time as the innkeeper or the other people in the inn. Spend some time thinking about, am I a part of a church? Am I a part of a small community, a part of a life group that is welcoming broken people from the outside? Do I have that kind of posture? Or am I saying, you know what, we're just gonna love the people that are already in our group, that are already in our church, that are already in our club? Ask Jesus, how do I have a broader view and see all the people that you want to become a part of this community? And I hope that as you do that you'll find that Jesus is gradually dazzling you with truth and is slowly revealing to you what it means to truly live.
Thank you, Pete, for sharing that message. And thank you again for hanging out with us. There is so much packed in that short story and many things that can fill our hearts. Jesus was truly the master storyteller. Now, how about you? When you read this story, where do you see yourself? I encourage you to try this week. Read through this story once a day. Then make time to pray and meditate. What is Jesus saying to you? Who is or who was the neighbor? Now, that's it for this week. Be sure to join us next week as we dive into another story that Jesus told with a little bit of a slant. And now don't forget to take advantage of the resources for you and your family found on our website. And we'd love to see you back here next week. Take care and God bless.